So welcome everyone to the 19th edition of ICF Sunday webinar, and today we have a very distinguished guest with us, Manish Purohit, who heads authors up front, and prior to that he has been with Encyclopedia Britannica and Disney Publishing, and we look forward to a enriching webinar where he will be throwing light on the licensing and rights issue, which is something that editors working with self-published authors or authors thinking of going for self-publishing would be interested in. So over to you, Manish.
Thank you, Vivek, and thank you all the participants as well. And thank you also for your kind words. I have kept the discussion a little open because, rights and licensing is a very large area to cover. And I'm just going to touch upon basic things. Of course, the scope of this discussion goes beyond self-publishing to include the general publishing, because in self-publishing, probably you may not have exposure or requirement for a lot of licensing issues. Rights, of course, is applicable for anything and everything that you write. But so it's an overall, discussion on rights and publishing, not necessarily with regard to self-publishing only. But of course, the same provisions would apply to any author or any other form of publishing. Now, typically, the aspects of rights and licensing are also as old as publishing itself. Licensing, of course, keeps evolving from time to time, and rights also acquire new meanings with regard to, the changing landscape of legal with regard to copyright, as well as the changing landscape of a very big yet significant effort that's going on in publishing, which is the commons effort, where it's encouraged to not restrict but to share. And that's really going to throw up a lot of challenges in the rights world. I have been very closely involved in publishing 2 books where we have, kind of opened up the books to public after a year of its publishing. So as in, we've gone ahead to the other extreme and said that, okay, we've published this, but now we have no rights to it. This belongs to people. So, they are free to use it in any form. They're just as long as they give us credit. And I must say that while I started that with a little bit of, suspicion, or I had my reservations, but the response on both have been phenomenal in terms of, how this could actually become a very interesting revenue model in future. It's quite easy to wonder that why is free going to become a revenue model, but I'll come to it at some point of time during the discussion. Okay, so primarily, let me cover the essential definitions, as to why rights and why licensing. Any publisher or author obviously wants to do a lot with this content, and the content can also be published in various forms. So that's the reason rights are essential. Why are they essential? Is because you want to produce or reproduce content. So that's like the basic premise. And this content can be produced in its original form in any language that it's published. It can also be then reproduced in various other forms. So it can be produced in a translation avatar. A portion of it can be produced as a selection. The entire book can be adapted into a smaller form and produced as an abridged version. Students, especially this is true of academic books, and this is very, very important. This is largely covered under reprographic rights. So the students or academia would like to photocopy it. So there are rights to photocopy. Okay, there is a very famous case of Cambridge University Press against the photocopier outside JNU. The case dragged on for a couple of years. Very interesting case, because I followed it up personally. The person who was involved in the case is a friend of mine, and it had arguments from both the sides. The publishers saying that they of course are losing revenue, and hence there should be a proper right for photocopying. And the authors whose books were published by the publisher was saying that, okay, it's fine. I'm getting to the students in any case. So it's okay. I don't need that money or I don't need that revenue. But even then, obviously since publishers are in a larger and more responsible business, this case dragged on for a long period of time, and for good, it has been settled or not settled. But I think it's good to define photocopying rights. And many universities, especially the foreign universities, have retained this in their agreements, and that's a very important form. Of course, now with the changing world, you want rights to reproduce your content on electronic devices as well as in any other future form, and essentially for web usage as well. The idea of rights is to, protect the author from illegal use, but more than that, also since a book or a product or content can be published in various forms, the idea is to ensure that the author gets some revenue for each of these activities. And it's not assumed by anyone using that content that they have anything to do, that if they can use it for free, or if they can just refer it, they can use it. Or since it's already in a book form, what is the problem if it is in an ebook form? So these are very, very, essential, I think, rights of the authors that they should exercise from time to time. And hence, they become a legitimate part of all the agreements. As editors, you also need to be aware of the rights. Let's say there could be two scenarios. You could be a freelance editor as well as an editor working with an organization. You are often the first point of contact with the author as well as with the outside world who may have use for that content. And immediately they would come to you either seeking permissions or exploring other possibilities. So editor has to be very, very well aware of the contracts that they have with the author. At the same time, I think it's the moral responsibility of the editor to inform authors about what their rights are, so that there is no illegitimate use. Around 3 days back, I had an author who is a friend of mine also. She had written a lot of books for a South Indian publisher who, without her permission, published those works on Audible, which is fine. It could have happened without, it could have happened in error. But for 2-year period, there has been no reporting of that revenue to the author. Okay, this again could happen because most of the publishers are short-staffed. They work with very small teams. There are sometimes not very good accounting systems in place. So this could happen. But in this particular case, it was intentional. And hence, the author is considering a legal case against the publisher. Now, whether it would go that route or not, one doesn't know. But this is another aspect of rights that an editor should be aware of. When you are a freelance editor, again, you have more responsibility because in some sense, author doesn't have access to any other system. And hence, you should probably, chances are that if you have edited the book and the author has published it either on his own or through any other organization, all the future queries in this regard may actually end up with you. So it's better that, freelance editors are also aware of all these aspects so that they could guide the author. And obviously, most of us know that eventually comes back to us again for more work, and hence that relationship building is becomes a crucial part of the work itself. So that's briefly on the licensing part. I'll also cover aspects of rights that you regularly face in your work, which is like image rights, which is like fair usage, which is something like, okay, how much of content from outside as a reference I can use, or sometimes it could be with regard to photographs used with the work, whether there are adequate rights or not. Reproduction of paragraphs from public documents. So all these aspects are also part of rights in some sense, and we'll cover it in subsequent slides. Licensing is a much more elaborate field. I mean, it's a much bigger business than rights now, because licensing now the entire business of brand licensing has become bigger than the basic rights business itself. So, but obviously it overlaps with the provisions of rights, but it includes adaptations to various forms. So I'll give you an example. For example, IPL. Now, you could have, you're using the brand, let's say Delhi Capitals or Royal Challengers Bangalore. And with the use of brands, if you turn out books, for example, the story of winning of IPL after 3 continuous losses, or, so it could be a story of motivation, it could be a story of planning, it could be a story of, how they put together a team, it's story of multiculturalism, but which is going under a particular brand, because the purpose here is to exploit the value of the brand or the players and sell something. Okay, so this falls under licensing. It has a lot of content tweaks. So for example, if you tomorrow, let's say you want to use Amrita Shergill's photograph and create t-shirts or coffee mugs, okay, then you're actually tweaking the content into some other form. Okay, and that's where the entire provisions of content licensing kicks in. Okay. You may, freelance copy editors are likely to get a lot of work in this space in the future, because many more brands in future would want to tell their story or tell their story in some way. So you could get assignments where, probably you have, say, suppose you're building a quiz storybook on a hockey team, or you could end up writing a film storybook, which is very, very popular form in the West. So these kind of aspects then fall under the licensing aspects. Okay, it could also be into various forms. So a book has to be changed into a consumer product or vice versa. So that's where a lot of provisions of licensing kicks in. Within the publishing world, licensing as a word is used for giving certain rights and for certain legal provisions with regard to rights as well. So these terms would be used in a very overlapped manner from time to time. And, of course, you have to, all of us, whether we are publishers or editors or business people, I think, it would always be good for us to, have a basic understanding of these subjects, so that we are able to interact with our authors better. And probably we are able to, enhance various aspects of the content that we are developing, so find multiple uses of it, find multiple revenue models. Okay. Very briefly, I mean, let's say if one were to look at why would you want to give or take rights, and why would you want to license content? I mean, that's something very, very basic. I think the biggest reason for this is to improve a consumer footprint. So for example, if you are doing an English book and you feel while you're editing a book, you feel that this book may have massive potential in Hindi or any other Indian language edition, you are probably looking at finding a new customer segment for it. Okay. So that's one big purpose why rights translation forms a big part of rights. You also feel sometimes that you have to seek rights. So for example, if you're developing a book on copyright law and the author needs to add chapters regarding fair use, then probably you can borrow those chapters from other authors or other court judgments by actually taking rights to use. Okay. But when it comes to giving rights, likewise, somebody can find a chapter from your book useful in any other book, in which case you are giving rights to your work. Okay. And that could be a very, this happens all the time in academic publishing. So if somebody has written on, anatomy, then probably some relevant subject or some relevant extract needs to be taken from some other book, for which you need permission or you need right to reproduce. A very other clear aspect is distribution. sometimes publishers or authors are present in one particular segment only, and they do a good job of that segment, or the publisher is, you know, known in that particular segment, does good marketing, has good distribution, but doesn't probably know how to get it around into other segments of the market. So again, to elaborate this in a very simple form, suppose there is a book on mental health, and this is you know, written in a very academic style for psychology students, done by an academic publisher. But if the book is done well, then there could be a possibility for a spin-off of this book, which is written slightly differently, packaged slightly differently, but for the normal audience, for general public. Now, organizations who are, let's say, very good in academic distribution may not know how to reach out to a general audience. So they would probably go to a trade publisher. Academic publisher would go to a trade publisher and then offer rights for that book for general market. Okay. So thereby, this means more revenue for the publisher. I mean, both the publishers, one who is taking right, one is who is giving right, and more revenue for the author because his content has been, you know, you augmented the content by additional distribution efforts. Okay. Other very important aspect of why do you give or take rights is also to expand to newer segments. So from my experience in Disney, I can tell you that, say, Mickey Mouse is a character, and there is a lot you could do around that character. So what you could do, you know, you could have the original comic books, you could have the coloring books, you could have quiz books, all interestingly using Mickey Mouse as a character, and, you know, making it interesting for the readers. One of the things that we did during this thing is also because Mickey Mouse is also important to a generation who is now in 40s and 50s. So, you know, in order to get a kid in them or something, you know, there are retro Mickey editions published, which would appeal to a certain age group or a certain set of audience. Okay. So this is, you know, really expanding content from one space into another psychographic segment itself. And this could be a very big rights business. Okay. There are organizations who give rights because of the fact that they may not want to take a risk in a market which is very alien to them. So for example, there is a company that sells books, encyclopedias, small volumes door to door. So if you're going into a market, you'll run into them and they'll offer you a very good dictionary or an encyclopedia or a good visual volume for a very attractive price. This used to be a very successful business. I mean, of course, with security and a whole lot of concerns, it has, you know, it has gone down a bit, but this is a very good segment. So this gentleman would, now it is very risky for a publisher to develop that kind of a network because it's not financially viable. So this gentleman would license the content or would actually take rights for a particular channel only. So he would not sell these books in bookstores, but he would sell it only into direct to home channels. Okay, this company is called Impulse Marketing and used very successful, and they've done some phenomenal products for large organizations like Oxford University Press or Encyclopedia Britannica, National Geographic. So all big brands, but again, for a National Geographic or a Britannica to get into a channel on their own could mean a lot of working capital and, you know, not viability of finance. And also it's a big business risk. So again, to mitigate business risks. Third is the legal environment itself. You know, in some cases, in countries, let's say like China or UAE, there are no easy entries to getting into a books business there. You know, UAE has a lot of censorship issues on everything. So while books are sold and bought, you know, there is a lot of paperwork that is needed. So sometimes organizations do, you know, give out rights for those markets, for markets like these, because legally they find it impossible to be present in that market on their own. Okay. So these are some of the reasons. I mean, of course, there could be other reasons as well, but these are some of the reasons why one would like to give rights, one would like to take rights, or follow a licensing model. Very interesting point here is that when you're talking about rights, as rights manager or as rights editors, you should know whether you yourself have the right to rights or not. And that this sometimes becomes, I mean, there have been instances where publishers have given out rights without actually evaluating their contracts thoroughly, that they in the first place didn't have the rights. Okay. So this is very, very crucial. All large publishers build it now in their contract, and they tell the authors that, the authors have given rights to the publisher for a perpetual time period. Now, as freelance editors, you may also sometimes have authors asking you to look at contracts, or just requesting your opinion on a contract. And this is one thing to look for, that I think morally, now, I mean, I've been part of traditional publishing as well as self-publishing, but I think you should explain this aspect to an author very clearly that, while you are giving out rights forever, you also have the options to take back rights. Because let's say if the relationship between the author and the publisher is not going as per the desired plan, you could do that. So essentially, the copyright is always with the author, always, except in some cases, like where the author has been paid a lump sum amount and told that he is doing it for work for hire. He may get a credit. He may get a credit for that work, but his royalty is just one time. So it's a commissioned project. Okay. In some cases, large organizations like, say, consulting firm, say Ernst & Young or PricewaterhouseCoopers, what they would do is they would create a lot of content, but because this content is created by their employee, they will give the employee credit to, acknowledge that they have created this, but the copyright would always belong to the organization and not to those individuals. Okay. So these provisions are also very, very important for editors to understand. I think there was a question on image licensing, where you license, so you seek right from a Shutterstock or a Getty Images for reproducing that particular image in a book. In which case, both Getty and Shutterstock or even Indian sources like Dinodia would have very clear rights, or Mata, for example, have very clear right, agreement with you that you can use it for certain purpose, you should use it, not use it for certain purpose. Shutterstock is the most liberal one, but Getty could have restrictions. So they would say that, okay, don't use it beyond 10,000 copies. If you want to use it beyond 10,000 copies, you have to pay us more money. Okay, you have to acknowledge the course. There are sometimes very clear indication of an image that this cannot be used for a cover. It can be used as inside material. It can be used for educational purpose, but it can be used for some other purpose. Okay. So these rights need to be understood by the editor as well as the author, and very clearly, so as to avoid any problems in future. There is also source attribution required. If you have sought right, you have to acknowledge that you have sought rights to certain thing. So you would always say on a copyright page, published with permission, or you would say image credits or photo credits, or whenever you have taken chunk of a content from other source, you would obviously identify that too in the copyright page. So this is very, very important. It is increasingly becoming important because let's say you have taken a quote from something and you're using it for a publication or for a report. Then there are now a lot of reports that go through, and this report, let's say, is going to publish by a journal. Then it goes to a software program, which which obviously clearly looks for any copied content. So if you have said in your report that, look, this content is copied, or you've actually given credit, or you've attributed that this is taken from there, then it's fine because you're not calling it your own. But if you've forgotten to given that, if you've forgotten and you've not given that attribution, then it could be serious trouble, because these softwares are very sophisticated, and you could kind of end up on the wrong side of with the publishers of the journals, because they're not going to like it. Okay, so it can really affect the image of an author, and also can reflect badly on an editor. So attribution has to be very, very important. Sometimes there are restrictive rights. So like I was talking about this, the person who sells books door to door. Okay, so they could say that, okay, you can sell it door to door, but you cannot sell it online. You cannot sell it in bookstores. So those are actually limitations. It could be geographical limitations, that you can sell it only in South Asia. It could be other limitations, like sell it only in web form, you can't print it, sell it only in electronic book form, sell it as a CD-ROM. So those are obviously limitations that apply to any rights or licenses. So all the limitations, let's say large children's player, for example, Cartoon Network, Disney, they would give out a very, very strict, stringent guidelines on how to use characters, and how you cannot sell beyond a particular geographical limit assigned to you. So you cannot produce a book in India and go ahead and sell it in Sri Lanka or in Bangladesh or in Dubai, unless you have the rights to do so. Okay, so these also there are geographical limitations in commons. So for example, if you're licensing an image or you're using an image from Creative Commons, sometimes they would say that, okay, this product, you have image usage right, but your product should not be sold in Spain or in Italy or in some other. So you'll have to keep that in mind when we are looking at looking at any evaluation of rights. Licensing and right guidelines are very important. Some large publishers and even local publishers, they give a very thorough details about if you're using their content or if you're giving them content. They have very clear usage. And so for example, Winnie the Pooh, a Disney character. Winnie the Pooh has friends. Now Winnie the Pooh lives in a jungle. So Winnie the Pooh and her friends, they cannot be shown if you're using those characters in an urban setting, because they don't belong to our urban setting. So whenever Winnie the Pooh and Winnie the Pooh and his friends' photographs are to be used, they would always be in the 100 acres wood. Okay, so this is just example of guidelines as to how you could use. I mean, so that way there are very clear and detailed indications. Sometimes they are not, or sometimes you as editors may be creating it. So these things are very important again. Fair use and right to publish. Now this is more or less an area where you are not seeking rights, but you're assuming that you have the rights. So for example, in a book, you're quoting somebody who has actually said this in a TV interview or in a press interview. Now, up to 250 words, or between 150 to 250 words, you can take that interview, quote it, refer it. You're absolutely fine using it in that way. But if you've not referred it, or if you have put it in a manner that is incorrect, then that may lead the author or the editor in trouble. Okay, so there are these provisions. Of course, there are hundreds of other provisions, but they all kick in. It's a very, very detailed subject. And one could go deeper into it, but obviously for the purpose of discussion today, I thought I'll open up with these 2-3 slides, and then request others to contribute to this thought, as well as ask questions. If I am happy, if I can answer them, I'll be happy to answer them. So this is the small presentation I had.
Thanks, Manish. There is a question from Veena. She's asking, should we take permission for attributes, or does just giving credits enough?
Okay, so this is a judgment call. So, for example, there are fair use provisions which allow you to take between 150 to 250 words. But I mean, I would safely say keep it between 150 to 200. And if there is a direct, let's say, attribution, I mean, there is something that you're directly using, attribute it. You don't need to seek permission. But again, you need to look at who is the source. So, for example, if this attribution or this particular paragraph that you're using is from say a highly classified government document, then it's important that you seek permission. Or if it is from something which is defense related, something which is taken from sources where the author has said that you need to seek permission. Okay, if you're not using it for a particular purpose, then you should. It's really a call that the editor has to take, but it has to be a very thought through call. Okay, so public documents you don't need to, newspapers you don't need to, but if you're taking it from a book source published by an international company where author has like a scientific data, I would suggest take it. And normally large publishers are very conscious about these things. They respond fast because they have the rights departments, and whenever in doubt, take the permission, and make sure that the word count limit is controlled. You can't really take paragraphs after paragraphs because it's quoted somewhere. So for example, if you're, let's say, in your book, let's say if you're putting a box item which has 500 words, okay, and you are attributing that this is, let's say, the discourse by Swami so and so in so and so book, you can't take it because this exceeds fair use and you need to seek permission. And chances are you'll get permission very easily, but you need to seek permission from them.
So Cora, I hope that answers your question. Manish just answered about like taking matter from a discourse, because Cora was asking, can an author take quotations from, say, Sri Ravi Shankar and make up a book and then give him credit but without taking permission from him?
Well, no. You can take quotations from Mahatma Gandhi because that's now out of copyright. After his death, out of copyright, you can take Mahatma Gandhi's quote. You can take quotations from the Bhagavad Gita. Okay, but no, not Sri Ravi Shankar's. I mean, you can, let's say, in course of your writing, you can probably, if there are 1 or 2 quotes or 3 quotes or 5 quotes, you can take it. That's fine. But you can't really make a book of his quotes because you just feel like. No, that's not. That's also.
I had a author who did that. He, in fact, even made a book on Modi's stuff. And he said, no, it's in the public domain. I don't need to take permission. He made up a book of 365 quotes saying that he doesn't need permission. Then when I asked him, he says, don't need.
Okay, so then in such a situation, let's say if you're editing such a work,
yeah,
make sure your letter or whatever terms of engagement that you have with such authors clearly define that you are not responsible for this, and he indemnifies you for whatever he is publishing. So
because I remember very clear, I went back to him saying you need to take permission. He says, oh, I brought up a book on Modi also without permission. I said, fair enough.
Yeah, what surprises me here is not that Modi took him to court, but what surprises me here is that Modi had 365 thoughts. So anyway, but yeah, I mean, this doesn't fall into this.
Manish, if you are following the chat box, I think if you can directly read the question, it will be.
Okay, better. Sure. I'll stop sharing the screen now because.
Yes. So you can maybe start from the latest comment and then go up.
Okay, just let me figure out where is the chat box. Okay.
I don't know, with Ravi, Sri may have taken, but.
Okay. So, okay, for some, yeah. So should I start with the new ones or?
Yeah, I think you can start with the new ones.
Okay. Uh, is it okay to use information from another article to use in an article if you're right and you're writing if the source is mentioned? Yes, you can, but it has to be less than 150, between 150 to 200 words. And also the intention is important here. It should not become your main portion of the article. As long as you keep it fair use, as long as you refer it properly, there is no problem. But you can't really take, let's say, something exceeding 200 to 250 words. I mean, maximum you can stretch is 250, but you really can't take, let's say, a huge chunk and just use it in your article. That's not advisable. Unless the article is in Creative Commons, where the author has said that feel free to use as part of your research, publish it, no problem, give us the credit, then it's fine. But if it's not in Creative Commons or not in free domain, don't use it, avoid it. Okay. Should I take permission from the publisher or the author in a case where I do not know how to contact the author or the author is deceased? Well, in such cases, you should write to the publisher and, they should be able to respond to you. Because if author is deceased, obviously there is that limitation, but publishers normally have then the right to, answer such situations. And yes, the permission should be taken from the publisher. Okay. With respect to right to reproduce, just wanted to confirm which is mandatory to give credits to author or whether it's sufficiently only to mention the name of the book. Okay. There are rules regarding it. Let's say when academic work quotes, they actually quote the name of the book, the name of the author, the name of the publisher, and also the page number. So that's the right way to do it. I mean, if you quote just the book, it falls. There's nothing wrong in it because intentionally you're not making any, any unlawful act. But it's ideal to quote all the four things that I talked about. The name of the book, name of the author, name of the publisher, and the page number, if you can. If not, then at least the name of the book and the author.
Yeah, but Manish, she is giving an example. She is saying, I am an author and had a book published and someone wanted to take content from my book. Is it okay to take my permission and just mention the name of the book without mentioning my name? So when you have an author, you will have a publisher also. So the right rests with the publisher or with the author. I think that clarity.
The right rests with the author. Okay.
Okay. So without checking with the publisher, the author can grant the right to someone to use the content.
See, it depends on the contract arrangement that the author has with the publisher. But if the author is granting rights, he should be informing the publisher also. And I'm assuming this is happening over email, so it's not just difficult to mark them in the copy. The author has full right to give permission, but it's good to keep the publisher informed.
Okay.
Mr. Purohit, I think it's a very silly question, but when I used to work with my publisher, an academic publisher in Pune, they used to use these images very easily. I remember having a discussion with them on using those Zuzus that were used by Vodafone on the cover. Without, sort of, they said it's in free domain, so we can, pick up whatever image we want to and use it on the cover wherever we want to. And is that really allowed? I mean, of course they didn't get caught or, these books are not that popular that they are going to be easily
No, so
visible?
it's not allowed. I'll tell you where is the, if a book is, since a book is a priced publication, okay, it is not allowed. If there is a news report on use of cartoon characters to promote a brand, and in that news report, if they have taken those photographs, it's absolutely fine. But in a book like that, no, unless you are seeking permission, certainly not. You should, or else you're taking it from a source, let's say a screen grab or from their website. Mind you, all these good brands have something called the press kit, which is there on their websites. You put it from there and then acknowledge that this is taken from their website, and this purpose is for, in the copyright page you should be writing that the purpose is for demonstration purposes. It's not to seek commercial value out of such photographs, and certainly you can't use these photos on a cover, no chance.
No, they would use these Google images. Just pick up any image from Google and just put it on the cover.
No, that's not allowed. See, it's impossible now for publishers also to track it.
Yes.
So there is a cost of tracking. It's very difficult, but it's not desirable. I mean, I'm talking of a fair practice, and one should avoid it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Manish, there is a question from
Yeah.
Surana.
Yeah. So Shubhi, yes, your any author publisher agreement or any author editor agreement, if there is any, has a very clear clause on indemnity and liability. So let's say if an author is saying that his research is, or anything that he's wanting to publish, is something that he's taking full responsibility of, okay, then there is absolutely no problem. But contractually, liability is assigned to the author. If there are liable books, okay, so the publishers can be made up. So it's an equal amount of legal risk for the publisher as well. But I mean, it's actually job of both publishers and author to make sure that they are not slapped with any cases. But yes, the larger responsibility lies with the author here. Okay, because he should not be violating any fact or something like, let's say, incorrect usage of anything that leads to copyright violation. And it doesn't matter whether it's your second part of the question. It doesn't matter whether it's for profit, not for profit, or any. I mean, see, if somebody wants to take someone to court and make an issue out of copyright violations, it could be very serious. So there are two aspects to it. The author should make sure that he is not violating anything. The editor, while editing, should ask for proper attributes. Refer the document back to the author. Or the editor could actually insist on removing something which he or she feels is a clear violation. So it's as much a responsibility of the editor as well. You can't just let it pass because the author has signed an indemnity. Because mind you, you are also going to be in trouble if a case comes up.
Thanks, Manish. And okay, more questions coming up.
Yeah,
I have Vivek, I have another question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
There was just this week, a translator, Spanish to Hindi, contacted me for getting some services. And according to him, the author is fully involved with, getting this book published, the Hindi translated book.
Okay.
Translated into Hindi, and now wants it published in India.
Okay.
So as an editor, or as, like, for example, if he asks me to give him certain services, which are like including editing or maybe cover designing, there are certain things that I should keep in mind. Where should I ask him? Does he have the rights? Should I
Yeah, just, in some cases, I think as editors, all of you should also prepare a kind of half-page document which should say, since you have engaged me for editorial activities, kind of confirm this, and it should have an undertaking that the person has the permission from the author to translate.
So I add it to the contract that I already.
Yeah, you should. That he see, one of the basic aspect of a contract is to say that the person who is entering into the contract has is entering it of his free will, and he has the necessary and necessary permissions to enter into a contract. So that's very basic point. So he should say that he has.
I don't need to see any proof from him or anything. Just
Yeah.
a contract.
Yeah, because
mentioned in the contract.
Yeah, as long as he's mentioned, as long as he has taken an undertaking, fine. Because it's impossible for freelance editors or even small publishers to verify, because this audit thing is a different skill, and it has cost associated with it. So we can't.
Correct.
Difficult to work for ourselves.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay.
Mr. Manish, I have a question here.
Yes.
You just mentioned that we don't need to bother whether we need to save that document or not. So I understand that this document should be saved along with the book she has been editing. Because if the document is not saved, an author just informed that he has sought permission earlier. So she will not have any proof that she had checked. So, to avoid her problem, I think she should have this thing.
Yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that when the author is admitting, he is admitting either on an email or in a letter. I mean, not verbally. Verbal has no meaning. So we have to seek a proper written confirmation. It need not be very formal in legal language, but on an email, very clearly mentioning that we should keep that for record. It can't be a verbal commitment. No, that doesn't work. Okay. If I'm writing a book on someone's life, is there anything specific I need to keep in mind while getting involved in the project as an author? Would you be okay? So biographies can be written it can be a non-commissioned biography. Okay, but what you need to make sure that you are not putting anything which is non-factual. So Virat Kohli has at least 3 or 4 books written on him, which is not authorized by him. There is only one book that has been authorized by Virat Kohli. But the rest are all biographies. So they can write it, and of course it shouldn't have anything which cannot be substantiated by way of a public document or by way of an interview or something. So that's fine. That's not a problem. Obviously, the attempt should be made to not make it controversial, but it should be just a nice biography which is backed up factually. And that's very, very important. You can't just have perceptions going in there, or you can't have unconfirmed media reports going in there. So that's the thought there. Can a person still come after you if this is a unauthorized biography? Well, unless you've put something which is incorrect or which bothers him or her, they can come after you. But there are many people who publish biographies. So as long as it's well written, very well referred. Biographies need to be extremely well referred in terms of attributes for everything. The background documentation should be fine. There is no problem. Okay, Lekha, you've brought a very interesting, question on the ISBN for reprints. Okay, can reprints be published without permission? Well, the contract defines very clearly that for a particular period of time, the publisher has the right. During that particular contract period, he can publish it as many times as he wants because he has the rights. So it is printing the first edition as well as subsequent editions, as well as reprint of those editions. Any number of time, as long as the contract clearly says that he's the publisher for that particular time period. No problems with that. Should a reprint have a new ISBN? This used to be a practice on the traditional publishers followed when I started. Each reprint would have a new ISBN. Yes, the reason is very simple. Because sometimes when you're doing a reprint, the price may change. And bookstores may still have the old edition of the book. So for them to identify, their systems to identify two books, uh, to identify one ISBN with two pricing becomes impossible. So that's the reason each reprint had a new ISBN. Mind you, it's not each new edition. It's each reprint should have a new ISBN. Yes, it used to. These days, however, it's not followed that rigorously, and it's not a very happy reason. But these days, not many publishers are having reprints. So this question doesn't arise many times. The other thing is that pricing may not change. Okay, so if pricing doesn't change, that people don't bother to check it. Even though the pricing doesn't change, a lot of traditional publishers, the old ones with a certain system would still have a new ISBN for a reprint, because they are able to then track which edition had which error, which they have subsequently checked and removed in the reprint and things like that. So yes, to answer your question, yes, it should have a new ISBN. I mean, that's the... Okay. Working with the person I'm writing the biography on. So I understand this question. Do elaborate, please.
I think it was a continuation of a previous thing. Like she.
Okay. So you're writing a biography of somebody who it's not still a official biography, but you've worked with that person. That shouldn't be a problem unless your engagement with that person. So for example, if you're a celebrity manager of a particular actress or an actor, and your engagement very clearly defined that you cannot talk about her life or mention it in public domain, then you can't write the book. You are under contract. You can't write the book. But if there is no such provisions in your employment or engagement agreements, you can go ahead. There isn't any problem. Okay, Vivek. Okay. Okay, so you can refer to any author contract, the general author contract, which obviously has the engagement between author and publisher. And what does it try to cover? It try to cover 2-3 things very importantly. That there is a time period in which publisher is publishing the author. So during that time period, the author cannot go to anyone. There are certain formats for which the author has rights. So the author is publishing in print, ebook format, in website format, etc., etc. The publisher may have or may not have rights to publish the particular author in languages. So those needs to be discussed. They part of this thing. And then there are the standard provisions of when is the publisher supposed to pay the author a royalty, how much royalty is due, what would be the time period when royalty will be calculated, how often the royalty will be paid, how many free copies does the publisher have, how many, the author would get. Can the author buy more copies? If yes, he or she can buy more copies, then, at what particular discount do they get paid for the copies that they have bought themselves? I mean, do they get royalty for the copies that they are purchasing? All these provisions are covered. And then there are confidentiality and other commercial and legal aspects like indemnity, confidentiality, what is the exit clause for the author. All these are typically covered in the author publisher contract. Okay, so there are a lot of standard agreement available in free domain. I mean, you can get it from various legal sites, and it's quite easily available. That's not it's a very standard form.
But Manish, are these agreements written in a language that's clear? Because that I think the legal language has many loopholes.
Yes. So for the scope of an editor's work, once you read a particular agreement 3-4 times, it's just a matter of getting used to it. You would start understanding the nuances very clearly. First time around, it could be overwhelming, but it could be overwhelming for, let's say if tomorrow I read a book on biotechnology, it would be difficult for me to understand that. So it's the same thing. But once you do it, once you look at 3-4 contracts, these things fall into place. Should the editor be aware of what the author and publisher? Well, if you want to get engaged, see, the editor should be covered from the aspect that there is no copied material. That is, what author is giving you is clean, no liable material, in the sense that he is not kind of copied it from someone and trying to call his own work. So that aspect the editor should be, at least a freelance editor should be, clear about, and, take that in writing so that there is no hassle. But, and whenever there is a discomfort, please clearly clarify to your authors that they need not give you credit, or they need not acknowledge you in your acknowledgements, which is good enough for you to protect. Okay. Is there a good source where I could get this information easily? Is this about copyright and rights? Then yes, there are a lot.
Yeah. Sorry, that was me. Yeah. Basically, general information like what you are giving us. Is there a, source where I can?
Yeah. So, well, Google is. There are a lot of good sites. You could look at the Frankfurt Book Fair site. They could have a lot of material on it. They would actually have a lot of material on it. So you could look at those sites. Frankfurt Book Fair organizes the rights, the rights fair and the rights, kind of where all people come and give their rights and contracts. So they should have some information on their website for sure. There could be a lot of legal sites, which are available in free domain. That should have some material which you can research. There is no dearth of great material available on the subject on the internet, but can I tell you a website right now? No, I don't.
Okay.
Can't tell you easily, but there are very good sites available.
Another thing is with fiction books, how important is it to get the copyright registration done? None of us ever think about that. Screenplays for movies, yes, they do get them done because there's a lot of chance of it being pirated. But for fiction books, so suppose an author asks me.
Yeah. So, when you are mentioning your name on the copyright page, by default, when you are asserting your moral rights for fiction especially, you are the copyright owner. So you need not register it separately with the Copyright Office, because again, it's a process. There are some forms to be filled. It's again that paperwork needs to be done. So 99% authors don't do it. But if you've really hit it big time, then obviously you copyright your work officially. But if you're like just trying to write it for personal gratification or you're struggling or whatever, yes, you should copyright it, but it doesn't still guarantee you. See, publishing industry is still okay. People don't do unfair practices as such. But if your book is successful, then you need to be careful you need to be very careful about the film people. Because I've had very, very bad experiences many times. So that's one area when you're discussing with anyone about film adaptations or film rights, the first thing that you should do is, before even meeting them, just make sure that your contracts are in place. The non-disclosure agreement contracts are in place, because film people can really misbehave. They can really misbehave. I've had an instance where a top-level Bollywood director, really A-list, actually invited my author 3 times over, a 70-year-old woman, 3 times over to Bombay, discussed the entire book, her book with him, which was a biography, made a movie on it, did not give her any money, did not even give her credit. So since the biography is in like a domain which is, it's about a historical figure, it's okay. You can say that I have sourced it from various material. But in all fairness, if you're tapping into somebody's mind and also their content, I mean, it's just fair you do it. So this is not one-off incident. This has actually happened many times over. So that's one area you need to be very, very careful.
Yeah, I know that because for one of my fiction books, some TV production company or something, they called me and then they wanted, to know more about the book and, the content and how to go about it. But then when I asked them about, how it will be, what kind of a contract will be signed and stuff like that, they never got back to me.
Yeah, so probably they would have read and adapted it suitably.
Maybe. I've never come to know also.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, Manish,
Sure.
can you tell us something about authors upfront? Because that is something I think most people won't know. And why did you actually shift from the traditional publishing area to the self-published area?
Okay, so yeah, I have been in traditional publishing and, right from very high-end academic publishing to even food, children, etc., etc. And there came a point where I felt that, self-publishing was a space that was going to grow. And I think it's exploding. And I thought there was a need for somebody who could probably bring in a certain sense of organization and quality. So I have I have never had problems in author or, the entire aspect of vanity. I think it's, it's all the top publishers actually have buyback arrangement with their author. So they're just trying to be a snob by saying that, look, we are not self-publishing. Oh, you are, very much you are. So there are revenue models which are, which I'm aware of, and I've been part of such revenue models. So I think, there was a need to really say it openly, yet bring in a certain level of quality. And that's when we started Authors Upfront. Our intention earlier and even now is not to really look at factory produced books, because we're not capable of it. Neither do we want to develop that capability. So yes, you should probably give an opportunity to author to publish, bring in a certain level of quality intervention that you can, so that a good quality work goes out into the market. The market is very large. So, there is space for at least 50 more self-publishing companies. So, that's really not an issue that there is intense competition. Also, there is, very important, there is a market at every price point. So there are people who are always going to use free services. Fabulous, good for them. They have, it's a democratic system. So anyone can write, anyone can publish. And I think that's encouraging, because with every book, you also get a new reader. So someday that reader will read your book as well. So I think you'll have to look at it. We have to look at it positively, and that's what we do. So we are a self-publishing platform. We encourage first-time authors. We have published, actually one of the only companies to have published a lot of published authors. So they are either looking at fast turnaround, or they are looking at, or they like us, or they are looking at good quality work coming out faster, or probably other publishers and them have not reached an agreement that is beneficial to both of them. So we've had a lot of top level authors who've worked with us, and we continue to draw interest from the author community. We are small, but again, there is an advantage of being small at times. So we are happy with that. And in over 6 years that Authors Upfront has been in operation, we've published over 300 odd books. A couple of our books have, so it's not just one or two, actually three or four of our books have hit the bestsellers list and right at the #1 position. So in that sense, yes, we have done some good work, and we hope to do some more good work.
Okay, all the best, Manish. And regarding this bestseller thing, is there a way to track how many copies actually sell?
Yes, so there is, if in the bookstore system, which is the physical bookstore system, Nielsen does a research, and Nielsen publishes the book scan every week. So that gives you an indication of, which book is doing well in the bookstore system. That data is fairly good. I mean, of course, now with number of bookstores coming down in the last 6 months, I mean, there will be some challenges. Amazon data, Amazon also publishes data which is about their own bestsellers, but it's a very technology driven data, and what it does is it can be tweaked. So like any software, there are also, like a good software, there are great hackers as well. So there are ways to work around the Amazon bestsellers thing. I mean, there are organizations who give you that service. So that's a little, I mean, I'm sure Amazon will also kind of get into a system where they will improve it. But as of now, yes, there are loopholes there.
And when you talk of the loopholes, like I was talking to someone and she mentioned that I purposely don't go in for e-books or the Kindle thing because it makes it easier for people to copy the content and use it without getting any rights or without paying something back. So do you agree with that, or is there a way to protect your content when you are going digital?
I completely disagree with this, but but I have my reasons. Okay, the thing is that I have tracked the Amazon Kindle space for the last 6 years, and the numbers that are going up there is so significant that we can't ignore it. And it's a very clear, why is it significant? It is because the number of devices that get out into the market is significant. When you have a device, you would obviously buy content. Okay. So in that sense, yes, there is, there is a large market waiting for you, which probably could be significantly large. So it cannot be ignored. What is the beauty of this market, and which is very, very optimistic for us publishers, is that this increased traffic is coming from India for Indian books. So again, this market is not going to buy your print book in any case. These are now large enough mutually exclusive markets. So Amazon, and especially ebook, should be top of your strategy. It cannot be, this fear of copying. Well, yes, people can copy, but then, they can copy from anywhere. I have actually seen more instances of piracy from bookstore network, and I'll tell you why. A person goes to a bookstore, buys a book. It's a legitimate purchase. That person, now there are so many high speed apps available, which can actually scan a book in an hour, and they put it up as a PDF on free sources. It's impossible to stop that piracy. So Kindle, actually, if you price it right on Kindle, as an author or as an editor, you could actually make a smart living out of it. It should be part of your strategic plan. You can't ignore it. The other aspect of ebooks is that Kindle Unlimited, which is the subscription service, has been gaining phenomenal momentum. I mean, the number of pages that's read is really jumping up exponentially. And you may get less revenue, but you do get some revenue. And above all, just keep this in mind, that this reader is not going to buy your print book. So anything that is coming in from there is extra. It's a bonus. And, this bonus would become bigger in times to come.
Mr. Purohit, this reminds me about DRM, Digital Rights Management. There's a client who's getting an ebook made, but selling it only on a website. his own website. So, you know, Amazon, Kindle, KDP gives you DRM. It's in, on each platform, they have their own DRM.
Yes.
Should I tell him, should I ask him whether he's getting it done, or is that a thing that he should look out for himself and, you know?
So, you know, this is a mistake that authors make, and they want to continue to make this mistake. Very, very simple, you know, any author's website traffic will be far lower than Amazon. So it's like saying, I'm not going to sell in the biggest dukan because I don't like the dukan. Okay, it's not good for your business. Secondly, Amazon's DRM is pretty decent. It's actually very, very good. So it's difficult to break into. Unless the author is like real bestseller, if he's selling from his own website, he should buy DRM services. So there is a company called Edition Guard, which actually allows you to put online DRM on your own website so that you don't copy. I mean, you know, so that it doesn't get copied and it doesn't get forwarded. But
Could you repeat that? The name?
Edition Guard.
Okay.
But you know, these are not cheap DRM services. There is actually no cheap DRM service. And ultimately it's going to steam a lot of money. It's like saying that for selling my own bookstore, I'll set up a bookshop. I mean, for selling my own book, I'm going to set up a bookstore.
No, actually, this person has a partner who's in America who has a very popular website. They're selling products on autism.
Okay.
So they're doing well as it is.
So they can market, they can market from as many sources as possible, but the delivery should happen from a more technically advanced source like Amazon. I mean,
so, and on their website, they can provide the link like
yeah.
from
Absolutely.
Amazon. Yeah. So do you think I should tell him this, or is it like
you should
unsolicited advice? Okay, I'll do that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Manish, like I want to ask, has COVID brought more opportunities for editors, or has it affected them negatively? Like, what has been your experience?
I think the number of people who want to write has gone up. So clearly, overall, you know, the editorial opportunities are going up. You know, what's happened is that also the unfortunate part, it has also increased competition. It has also increased competition for editors and for us, I mean, for all of us, is because a lot of people from the media space have also like are not in regular jobs now. So it's expanded the overall talent pool. And, you know, so while the work has expanded, the talent pool has also expanded. When talent pool expands in a time when there are tough times, then, you know, there is a pressure on margin. So that's also happening. But, you know, like any business, I guess all of us would need to focus on our skills, but also on our ability to build relationships. And ultimately, you know, that's what really matters for individual businesses like ours. So that's again very crucial.
Manish, I have one more question. Like, as an editor working for you, what will be your expectations from me when it comes to the formatting of a book? Like, would you want the editor to take care of certain things? Because we had a session on using MS Word for typography, for typesetting. So is it something that the freelance editors can do at their end to make it easier for you at your end when you actually go for typesetting or printing the book and printing the book later on?
Okay, so, you know, what you're suggesting is an ideal mechanism, and I desire to achieve it. But I've been very, very unsuccessful and fallen on my face many times on this. Because I think, you know, it's unfair for us to expect the editors to become designers and typesetters. You know, there are different skills. You know, I've been a publisher for so many years. Can I claim to be an editor? I don't think so. That's not going to happen. It's a very, very different skill. So I think one has to look at, one has to respect specialized skills. Can there be tools like MS Word? Well, MS Word has great features, but it also has limitations. There are organizations who have worked on it successfully, and I can tell you one company certainly, which has done a great job of doing this, is a company called ICTect, ICTECT. So they provide a tool which is quite good in terms of actually taking it directly from Word into a PDF kind of a stage with lots of tagging and features built in. Okay, it requires a bit of training, but it's not like impossible kind of a training. It's very good training. You know, when you're using design and formatting kind of aspects, it would make the editor's work easy after the book is edited. So, you know, at the proofreading process may become faster and easier. But should the editor be in the first place also become the typesetter or a designer? No. I think you're compromising on, you know, you're trying to get a completely different skill from a completely different skill set. So, you know, your editing then would suffer, and I would hate to do that. Or likewise, you know, your typesetter cannot really look at all the other aspects. That also is a very specialized skill. It may appear to be, you know, it may appear to be simple skill, but it is not. And, you know, Jyoti, who has worked with me, I mean, you know, we continue to work together on projects, would tell that, you know, it's really not so easy to achieve this. I mean, I don't think it's easy. I mean, it's not possible, at least in the near foreseeable future, unless somebody really develops a very nice interface which allows you to do so. And I've done some research around that, but so far, no, the results have not been all that great.
Okay, thanks, Manish. So there is one more question from Lekha Ganesh.
Yes. Okay. Okay, I think, you know, it's a, I mean, I'll answer this question, or my answer may appear a little defensive, which is, but again, it's my view. In-house editors should have minimum amount reserved as rights? No. Because the entire risk of every book is with the publisher. It's not even with the author. So before, you know, really kind of analyzing this question that should editor be part of, you know, any revenue share? No. I mean, you know, you have to actually understand the nuances of business. The biggest risk in publishing is inventory, you know, and you could actually, all the money that you have earned on 5 good books can be lost in even half a bad book. So it's a very risky business in terms of financial management. And unless, you know, the editor becomes the publisher and the owner herself, I don't think there is any, I don't think this is a feasible idea. Now, as far as the other part, that, you know, some of the books are listed around $770 or $2,000 on Amazon in the US, please understand these are only listings. They actually hardly ever translate to sales. So you know, it's really not a very easy recovery business. And all these top level books are actually individual collectors. It's not publishers who is going to get money out of it ever. So it's a very tough business. Also, it's a business where there is a fair amount of dishonesty from the channel. So what happens is that, you know, your distributors do not report correct number, your retailers do not report correct number, and there is no way to verify it because most of these bookstores do not even have a computer. So for you to track what sales is happening where is impossible. And it's not that bookstores do not want to do it. It's just that it's impossible for them. It's a very unorganized business. There are some 17 to 18,000 publishers who sell regularly. It's in terms of sheer number of people and number of transactions involved. These are very small transactions, and it's impossible to keep track of it. So to say that you build a viable business like a consumer product business online and get all the information and then take decision, publishing is at least 10 years away from it. So it's a tough one to to really have a more collaborative revenue arrangement. I don't see it's fair on the publisher also, because it's at the end of the day it's a business and they got to make money so that everyone remains in the chain.
Mr. Purohit, another question is, for traditional publishing nowadays, with the ebook sector doing so well, so 10% to 15% is the royalty that is offered for print books. Am I right? What about the ebooks? So when we are, as a publisher, if you publish somebody's book traditionally, and the author keeps, they expect 50% royalties on ebooks. There
will be a time, sometimes in the next near foreseeable future, where some of the successful authors actually may not give you the ebook rights. They would keep it for themselves. And I agree why, because they can deliver that number. Amazon can deliver that number for them. First thing that you need to do is understand that the royalty of ebooks is always on net receipts. It's not on the MRP. So that aspect needs to be made very, very clear to the authors. The other aspect that you need to look at telling them is that typically a publisher, now Amazon may say 70%, but in reality, a publisher gets only 30% of the royalty. Okay. 35% of the royalty. After that, there is a tax deduction at source, which is like a TDS equivalent. It's called withholding tax, because Amazon's accounting is happening from India, from USA. So there is a withholding tax, okay, which you actually don't get it in your cash flow. So you're typically getting only 27 to 28% of the MRP, of which you should share 50% with the author. Absolutely no problem. Okay. The authors also need to understand that when the ebook revenue is coming to them, if they were to publish independently, the revenue is paid to them only after a certain threshold. But when they are going to a publisher, so for example, only when your royalty reaches $120 or something will Amazon actually pay you. If it doesn't reach, they will not get paid. So they'll get nothing. While with a publisher, they'll at least get 50%, because together a publisher may have 200, 300, 400 books. So at least the publisher's threshold will be reached very fast. So this is a technical point which the author need to understand. Also, it's not easy to, gather those reports. It's not easy to keep accounting for, again, an author is an author. So just as an editor cannot become a typesetter, the author cannot become an accountant. These are completely different skills. And I think they need to understand that there is an administrative cost and but yes, at the same time, most publishers do not disclose these figures to authors. And they are saying that, okay, for ebook also you get 10%. Now that's unfair. You have to have a fair cut. And that's where I think we should arrive. And that's where the self-publishing business, I think, has very clearly, everyone has announced that the author gets 70% and publisher gets 30% of whatever is due. So I think that's in public. Those kind of terms being in public domain actually helps authors and helps publishers also, so that there is no unreal expectations. So these are very complex aspects, but you should educate your authors about it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Manish, for a great session. And I hope we asked the right questions. How has been your experience?
No, it's absolutely. I was not expecting so many questions, but I'm glad you asked them. And I hope I have answered at least 90% of them correctly, because that would be a good achievement. So, what I'm saying is also not like completely, there can be a different variation of it. So do your own research. What I am, offering is, because I've had some experience handling these matters. So one has, tried to share that part, but there are new provisions coming in every time. There are new things happening. So it's best for us to keep all of us educated, and that's what the business is all about.
Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks Murugaraj for facilitating the session, and thanks Jyotirmoy for introducing Manish. It was wonderful listening to him and getting to know the insights that he shared, and I hope we will have him sometimes later in the future also, and we will have a long and fruitful association with him. So thanks Manish for taking out time on a Sunday, which I know it was very difficult for you, but
No.
thanks for doing it for us.
Thank you. I too enjoyed the interaction, and I hope to meet you again.
Thanks
Thank you,
everyone.
Mr. Purohit. Thank you
Thanks
so
a
much.
lot.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
We will see you next week again at 11 a.m. The session will be by Murugaraj. It will be on preparing style sheets. So that will be our 20th session, halfway mark of the 40 episode webinar series. And yesterday we also launched the interview series. So I hope you watched it live. If you didn't, I shared the link in the group also and in the chat box also. And the interview series will basically be a fortnightly thing. So the next interview will be with Surit Das. Priya Talwar will be in conversation with Surit Das. So it will not be a one-way thing. It will be a two-way interaction, basically a conversation. And so two Saturdays we are going to have that, and the remaining 2 Saturdays we will have some informal sessions. And as part of those informal sessions, like we have some people who are working on a travel series. So I think that will help us break free from the serious stuff of webinars and explore what our country has to offer. We can maybe even go outdoor, attend with a phone, not be like glued to our desktop. We can go out and others can see the location or the city where you stay. So that will be like glimpses of India kind of thing. And do share your inputs in the group, or you can even private message me. And I hope the series has been helpful till now. And we have been putting up the recordings. Some have not yet been put up because it has been a lot of work at Murugaraj's part. Sometimes like a lot of editing needs to be done, even in the PPTs, because we don't want to put out anything which has like some errors there. It doesn't really look good on our part. So that's all for now. See you next week.